My name is Glenn, and I have HPV. That stands for Human Papillomavirus. Ever since I can remember, I had warts. They would be on my hands usually, although I also had some on my feet. I don't know why. I don't know where they came from. I can remember being a little boy and being taken to a podiatrist who was a bit of a sadist, I think, and him working on my warts. That wasn't so bad. It was the ingrown toenails that that were painful with him. But he would trim the excess skin away on my feet, and he'd apply some acid directly to the wart itself, which doesn't have nerves in it, and a little bit would get on the skin around it, which he had just trimmed down, so that'd be a bit painful. At that point in time, obviously, I was a lot younger than I am now, and there were no lasers or anything like that. So it would take several visits, and I'm sure it cost my parents and their insurance company a fair amount of money to get rid of the warts. I don't really remember about getting rid of the warts on my hands. I remember trying to bite one off once, which probably wasn't a very good idea. I don't have warts on my hands anymore. I haven't for a long time. Most of the warts, except for one on my feet, which were all on the bottom, they're called plantar's warts, were removed when I was a kid. But I had one that, until after my wife died in 2017, I had it on my foot. And finally, while I was still in Indonesia, I went to a podiatrist, and he used a laser to scrape it all away. It was every once in a while when I'm walking, I can feel some pain in that area. It's like, I don't know what it is, what causes it or anything like that. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason, but I don't have any warts anywhere on my body now. Not on my hands, not on my feet, not on my eyes, not on my genitals, nowhere. But I am, by choice, celibate, and I have been for over 5 years now, and it's because of the HPV, because of the virus that causes the warts. There are over 150 kinds or variants of the HPV, and of them, a small number, perhaps 10 or so, 15 maybe, can alter the DNA in the cells they're in to cause cancer. Now, most of our warts are benign. When I was a kid, they used to think that warts on your genitals were different than other kinds of warts. They called them venereal warts. But the truth is it's all part of HPV. Most warts are not dangerous. There are certain warts that have a low risk of cancer, and then there are the group that I mentioned before that are high risk for cancer. In around 2007, my wife started complaining of having, I believe it was menstrual problems, and I said, you should go to a doctor, and she refused. She said that she had been checked out in the past and was fine, and she just ignored it. My wife died of cervical cancer caused by HPV. It was a long and very unpleasant journey for the both of us, although I'm sure you can imagine that it was much worse for her than me. From the point around September, or was it August, of 2014, when she was diagnosed with stage 2B cancer of the cervix, until she died of stage 4 cancer, but the primary cause of death was hypoglycemia, which is to say there wasn't enough sugar in her blood because she had been starving herself, because she was so traumatized by the cancer, but primarily by the chemotherapy, that she could not bring herself to eat most things. So she was very badly malnourished. She was mostly skin and bones when she died. She had 2 seizures, one with me right there in the high care unit, and she was thrashing around and looked strange, and I had to hold her down while the nurse did whatever she was doing to prepare and then to help my wife, because my wife was thrashing enough that I was afraid she was going to pull the IV and stuff out of her. I'm not going to tell you about all the trouble that we went through in the 2.5 years before she died. Physically, mentally, and financially. As she was recovering from that seizure that night, late at night, she asked me to hold her, to pick her up, and to hold her. But there are so many tubes, the nephrostomy tubes going to each of her kidneys, and the IVs, and then the wires that were monitoring her blood pressure and stuff, that there was no way for me to pick her up and hold her in my arms. And I had to tell her over and over again what had happened, because until she was fully recovered from the seizure, she couldn't remember that I had already told her. And of course she couldn't remember the seizure. The end of the week, she was dead. She had gone from a woman who was so buxom, so vibrant, so healthy looking that people did not believe she had been diagnosed with cancer. I had to allow reporters to see and photograph the diagnosis from the doctor. I had to allow a reporter into the hospital, into the radiotherapy room, until the nurse kicked him out, so that they would believe she was that healthy. And by the end, she had no hair. She had very little in the way of muscles. She still wanted to fight. They couldn't do anything more for her. She would have had to have gone to another hospital, but she was too weak to go to the hospital to stand the long trip by vehicle. But she still wanted to. It was a horrible experience for me, for my kids, for her family, for her most of all. I can't in good conscience, just for the sake of sex or even for love, take the risk of having that happen to another person. It's just not worth it. Having HPV is not a death sentence, but I don't know where it is. You see, I've talked to general practitioners, family doctors. I've talked to an immunologist a virologist, a dermatologist, and maybe a couple others. I've looked at medical sites. And while, if you go to the regular internet, they'll say on some sites, your body will eject the virus. The majority of the doctors I've spoken to agree that no, your body will not eject the virus, it will suppress it so that you don't have anything going on. But it'll stay with you forever. So I asked naturally, wanting to get rid of it, how can I get rid of it? Well, you have to be tested. And I said, okay, take some blood, take my urine. Well, it doesn't work that way. We have to take skin samples. And I kind of knew this because I remember when I was in my 20s, I thought I had a venereal disease inside my urethra. That's the tube that the pee comes out of. And so they had to stick this little wire brush up my urethra to get a skin sample. Now, this one's larger, but it's basically the same thing. They had to stick one that was small enough to fit into my urethra without too much discomfort, but large enough that it could scrape skin cells off the inside of my urethra. It did not feel very good, and peeing for a day or two was not pleasant. I had that done to me 2 or 3 times, and they never came back positive. I know for a fact that one woman that I was engaged to back in the 90s had HPV. How do I know this? Because one day she came home and she said, I have cervical dysplasia. Now, I had no idea really what that was all about. She said, there are some warts on my cervix, and I'm going to have them removed. So, she did. But at that point in time, and until my wife was diagnosed with HPV-caused cancer, I had no idea that warts could be dangerous. In fact, when I was a kid, my parents gave my sister and I each a book about health, including STDs and pregnancy and stuff. And HPV was listed in there as venereal warts. And there was no information about this because prior to around 1995, scientists hadn't even figured it out. And then once they figured it out, a vaccine was developed called VolCel. So getting back to the point here is I asked the doctor, okay, so where do you need to take the skin from? And the doctor said, where do you have warts? I said, I don't have any warts except for a plantar's wart on my foot. And obviously that wasn't the cause. And the doctor said, well, if you don't have any warts, we don't know where to take the skin samples from. And even if we did, there is no guarantee that we would be able to successfully grab a sample that would contain the virus in it. Apparently there's a failure rate caused by being unable to locate the infection site and to scrape enough to get some of the virus out. So I was like, so basically what you're telling me is until I have warts that show up, you can't test me, and even if you do test me, it might not work out. Yes. Oh, well, that sucks. After my wife died, I made the decision. It was horrible what she went through, and I couldn't do that to another person. So, I don't date, I don't have sex, I don't have romance. because I don't want to cause that kind of suffering to somebody else. When I was young and quite sexually active, even when I was being reminded about HIV and chlamydia and syphilis and gonorrhea and stuff, and even when I caught chlamydia once, for a variety of reasons, biological sex drive, mental illness, and so on and so forth, loneliness, I couldn't stop myself from having unprotected sex. In fact, the only thing I would think about was, just don't get her pregnant. The thought of diseases just didn't enter my thought processes at that time, and I don't know why. As bad as my wife's experience was, and the experience I had with her going to almost all the doctor's appointments and all the hospital visits with her, almost all anyways, and hospital stays of up to, I think, 2 weeks it was. Yeah, it's hard to stop doing what you see everybody else doing. Do you know what ALS is? If you don't, look it up. Or go to a cancer ward where the people who've been going through so many things of chemotherapy that they're basically skin and bones. HIV is even worse. It's worse than cancer. It's worse than ALS. If you get HIV and it turns into AIDS, it's horrible. And yet HIV is on the increase. And the other sexually transmitted diseases, well, the viruses mostly we don't have any solutions for. And the bacteria are developing resistance to antibiotics. Syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia are all starting to become immune to antibiotics. I know, especially if you're a young person and you have a high sex drive because of hormones racing through your body, that this is hard for you to it is hard for you to fathom. It is hard for you to put into context. It is hard for you to appreciate just how horrible it is to go through what I went through with my wife, or what other people have gone through with people who have ALS or AIDS, or even just the slow death of syphilis and gonorrhea and chlamydia. Do you remember hearing about the prohibition in the 20s where alcohol wasn't allowed in the U.S. and Al Capone became a famous mafia figure running alcohol? He had syphilis. And if I remember correctly, it made him kind of crazy and he died of it in prison. Historically, there's a lot of history available about syphilis and gonorrhea. There have been documentaries done on it, and how it, just look. Stay away from prostitutes. Don't have multiple partners, and always wear protection. Now you're thinking, well, I'm a man, I don't have a cervix. I don't need to worry about it. Well, yes, you do actually. Whether you're heterosexual or homosexual. We're just talking about HPV here. HPV can cause cancer in different parts of the body, not just the woman's cervix. Also in the vagina. also in the mouth, and the throat, and the tongue. So, before you take somebody's penis into your mouth, think about it. Do you want the pus from gonorrhea, chlamydia, syphilis seeping out into your mouth? Do you want warts turning into cancer in here? Your penis can get cancer. Would you like that? I mean, it's a rare thing, but it happens. You can even get warts in your eye. I know it feels better without condoms. And condoms can break. But the truth of the matter is condoms are the only real protection you have. Now for HPV there is the vaccination, which protects against, I believe it is 9 of the deadly variants of HPV. But there's still all the other diseases out there, some of which can kill you and others of which can do serious damage to you. So please just use a condom all the time. For oral sex, for vaginal sex, for anal sex, whatever kind of sex it is, please just use a condom. I realize it takes something out of the experience, but you can learn to make it part of the experience and part of the eroticism of the experience. That's a choice you can make. Did you know that in South Africa, the president of South Africa refuses to acknowledge that HIV causes AIDS? And the health ministry is not willing to address it correctly. And other leading figures are not willing to address it. Guess what? In South Africa, polygamy used to be a big thing, and a lot of people there, men and women now, are very sexually active. They have multiple partners, sometimes every day, sometimes every week, sometimes every month. And these are overlapping groups. So what one group gets, it gets eventually passed to other groups, and then to other groups, and to other groups. It's like a ripple. In Africa currently, in South Africa, I mean, about 1,000 people per day die of AIDS. Now, I don't remember specifically for the cancers caused by HPV how many people die. It's not as bad as HIV, I don't think, but it's also a pretty high number, especially in countries where, either they're idiots like the government of South Africa, or the medical system isn't good enough, like in Indonesia where my wife died. You may think that you're immune. You may think that you're invulnerable. You may think you're going to live forever. You may feel like, it's going to happen to somebody else probably, but not to me. Well, that's just the stupid side of you talking. I don't want to see you have to go through the pain and the suffering of the disease and the treatments like my wife did. My wife, when she would go to chemotherapy and they would hook her up to the IV, we would lay in this room, this extended room, with all the other cancer patients who were in various stages of treatment. And the ones who'd been going through it the longest were very thin, skin and bones, and they were constantly vomiting, even when their stomachs were no longer containing anything. My wife eventually became one of them. Every time I found a drink, a beverage that she liked, by the time chemo was done, she was so traumatized by the chemo that she wouldn't drink that beverage. She stopped wanting to eat foods. Nothing tasted right. She asked for bread with cheese. I brought her bread with cheese. She said it tasted like mold. I said, no, it's fresh. No, I taste mold. She wanted Chinese food. I bought her Chinese food. It had MSG. She refused to eat it. So I had our best friend buy some MSG-free food, and she insisted it had MSG and refused to eat it. You have no idea how that tears at the soul, tears at your sanity, to go through that as either the patient or the loved one of the patient. You may think you want to die, and there are people who deliberately seek out HIV positive people and have sex with them so they can have HIV, which I don't understand. You may think that you need to die, but trust me when I say dying of one of these diseases is it's not, there's no glory in it. It is a slow death, full of pain, loneliness, bitterness, rejection, confusion, inability to eat, hunger, and much more. If you want to die, getting HIV or HPV or syphilis or gonorrhea or anything else is not what you want. So I beg you, please. If you can't make a vow like me to be celibate, at least use protection and tell the partner that you're with, I have this disease. You may save somebody's life, and it may be your life that you're saving. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me. And I pray that the lesson of myself and my wife, Ita, will make you pause to think and make a wise decision. Because my children now, for the past 5 years, haven't had a mother. And I'm not going to lie and say I'm the best father in the world. Just please be careful.